This material is part of our course Microeconomics. You can find more at professorpro.net. The current video belongs to Unit 1, Demand and Supply, and covers the class Market Equilibrium. The object of this class is to address and answer the following questions. How do we find the equilibrium price and quantity of a market? What is the definition of an economic equilibrium? Are most markets in equilibrium? And what happens when markets are not in equilibrium? Let's start with the basics. Remember that a demand curve has a negative slope, which means that an increase in the price of a product usually makes customers want to buy less of it. The opposite is true for a decrease in the price of a product. Additionally, the supply curve has a positive slope, which means that an increase in the price of a product usually makes producers want to sell more of it. The opposite is true for a decrease in the price of a product. As such, when the product is too expensive, consumers don't want to buy much of it, while firms will want to sell a lot of it, leading to what we call a surplus of production. In contrast, when the product is too cheap, consumers want to buy a lot of it, while firms don't want to sell much of it, leading to what we call a shortage of production. There is, however, a right price at which consumers want to buy the same amount as firms want to sell. We call this the equilibrium price, which leads to the market equilibrium. Take a look at this. The market equilibrium is the price and quantity at which there is no surplus or shortage of production. The market equilibrium tends to happen by itself in free and perfectly competitive industries. Market forces will push consumers and producers towards that equilibrium. Now, let's see how these concepts can be represented in graphs. When talking about the market equilibrium, we say that a product is too expensive when its price is above the point where supply and demand intersect. Note that at this price, quantity demanded is lower than quantity supplied. We call this a surplus of production. We also say that a product is too cheap when its price is below the intersection of supply and demand. Note that at this price, quantity demanded is higher than quantity supplied. We call this a shortage of production. These two situations are not in equilibrium because they lead to either a surplus or a shortage of production. Thus, the market equilibrium is when the price is at the point where supply and demand intersect. Note that at this price, quantity demanded and quantity supplied are equal. As such, there is no surplus and no shortage of production, which means that the market is in equilibrium. Free and perfectly competitive industries will tend to move towards the equilibrium if they are not already on it. If these markets are in equilibrium, economic agents will have no incentive to move away from it. When the product is too expensive, firms are not able to sell everything they produce. This results in the build-up of unexpected inventory, which can be quite expensive for them. In order to sell their extra production, firms tend to compete with each other by reducing their prices. When the product is too cheap, firms notice that consumers wish to buy more than they produce. This often means that consumers are willing to pay more than the current price in order to get access to the product. Firms can then take advantage of this competition between consumers to ask a higher price. In economics, the concept of equilibrium is characterized by two conditions. First, if markets are not in equilibrium, market forces will push them towards it. Second, if markets are in equilibrium, they will stay as they are. To conclude, let's review the questions that this class set out to answer. In this class, we saw that, on the graph of supply and demand, the equilibrium price and quantity is found where the two curves intersect. An economic equilibrium is a stable situation in which economic agents have no incentive to change their behavior. free and perfectly competitive markets tend to be in equilibrium. Other types of markets, which we will see later, tend not to. And finally, free and perfectly competitive markets that are not in equilibrium will move to the equilibrium over time. Price and quantity will change to eliminate the surplus or shortage of production. If you found this video helpful and want to see more, you can find the following examples. Thank you.